Welcome to Truth Bombs and Tea. I am your host, Tina Binden, and this week we are looking at inflammation. And this is something that is important to me because I suffer from chronic inflammation, and I have done ever since the troubles of menopause. But turns out most of us do have inflammation, and some of it gets out of control and becomes chronic. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So, we're going to be discussing what inflammation actually is so that you can recognize whether, any of the ailments or conditions that you have are due to inflammation. We're going to look at how we get it, like how does one become chronically inflamed? And most importantly, at the end, I'm going to share how we can reduce it or bring it back to its normal function in the body. So, inflammation is actually a natural process that occurs in the body. We're supposed to have an inflammatory reaction, okay? So, generally, what is a good type of inflammation is if we get injured or we get an infection, the immune system, triggers inflammatory responses. And so it can be things like redness and swelling and heat. You'll notice that when you get a cut or an injury or the cut gets infected, it kind of swells up and it becomes hot and red. And that's the body's inflammatory system doing its thing. It does that to heal the situation, and then it subsides and it goes away. The problem is some of us have chronic inflammation, and that is that your whole system is inflamed. So think of it like your body's internal fire department. Okay. Generally, when a fire comes, aka the infection or injury, your fire department goes out, does its thing, puts out the fire, goes back. Chronic inflammation is kind of like the fire department hanging out 24/7. Okay. And this is not good news, okay, for your body, because chronic low to mid grade inflammation is a direct contributor to chronic diseases that actually can kill you. Okay. So this is a positive video, but I am going to give you some truth bombs about why we get inflamed and the risks of having that chronic inflammation. And again, as I said at the beginning, we'll wrap it up with a nicer bow, which is how do we reduce it to a manageable level that's not going to contribute to chronic disease, and hopefully get it back to its normal functionings where it comes out in acute little situations like cuts and infections. Okay, that's what it's supposed to be doing. So let's see if we can get it back to that. So, inflammation and disease. I'm just going to read a bit of the research that I've done for you. Well, not read, but refer to it. So, inflammation is one of the most chronic contributors to cardiovascular disease. And research from the American College of Cardiology this year shows that inflammation, that your heart really, really doesn't like inflammation, and it's a direct contributor to heart disease, heart attack, and strokes. Okay. Diabetes and Alzheimer's, there's a direct connection between chronic inflammation, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. So, all of the things that I'm going to list for you now, the four of them that are the main ones, there's a direct link between chronic inflammation and these conditions and diseases. Okay. So turns out that 80% of people that have Alzheimer's also have diabetes type 2. Okay. So there's a link between these conditions and what they are now terming diabetes 3, which is chronic inflammation. Okay. So None of us want to get diabetes. And if you already have diabetes, that's something that I'm sure that you know how to manage. But this new kind of type 3 is the chronic inflammation, okay, that mucks your system up and makes it inflamed, okay, all the time. And that can contribute to developing diabetes, exacerbating your diabetes, and has a strong link to Alzheimer's. Okay, cancer, the big C, right? There's a direct relationship between inflammation and cancer, turns out. And there's a lot of literature on this, okay? So, persistent inflammation creates that environment where your cells start to mutate and that tumors can grow, okay? So, that's another one. And then, of course, as we get older, our systems are not firing on all six cylinders. Our DNA starts to break down, etc., etc. But if you have chronic inflammation, it actually um, speeds up your aging, and plus it also makes your aging a lot more uncomfortable, just in terms of things like aching joints, um, bursitis, arthritis, and of course those other diseases. So chronic inflammation is basically at the root cause of most really chronic illnesses that have the mortality attached to it. So there's a lot of reasons there why we need to get our chronic inflammation under control. So signs that you might have inflammation are things like your joints swell up. You might have gout or arthritis. You can have, brain fog. You can have um, a lot of gut issues as well because your gut is inflamed. So they're things to look out for. But why do we have inflammation in the first place? Well, here's another truth bomb for us all, myself included, and that is a lot of it is lifestyle choices. Okay. Now, it's not all our fault because the modern lifestyle is pretty much a cocktail for getting inflammation to some degree, right? And some of us are more prone to it than others. So it's things like poor diet. So the Western diet is basically the inflammation cocktail, right? Highly processed, highly sugared foods, hardly any nutrition, right? So poor diet, chronic stress, and you don't have to look around very far to see how busy everybody is, how time poor everybody is, and how much the quality of sleep has declined, right? So chronic stress, lack of physical activity. A lot of us are in offices or sitting in front of computers or screens. So when we're very sedentary. Smoking, that's an obvious one. Being overweight. Okay, so overweight and of course obesity, the body's struggling, and that just contributes to inflammation. Autoimmune disorders, so even things like the arthritis, the lupus, Lyme disease, all of those. Well, maybe not Lyme disease because that's caused by, I think is it ticks or something like that. But certainly, autoimmune issues are when the body attacks itself. Okay, so if you have an autoimmune issue, that contributes to inflammation. Toxins in the environment, so pollution or chemical exposure, even things like fragrances, spraying perfume, putting sun cream on, putting insect spray on, like directly onto your skin. Over time, those toxins can build up, and it's the accumulation of those toxins that then causes the inflammation. And of course, aging, right? Because things start to slow down and break down. So these factors often, pile on top of each other. So it may not be one particular thing, but it's a culmination and an accumulation. And as I said to you, this happened, my chronic inflammation really kicked in when I went through menopause, and I'm probably still going through it. So, for 48 years or so, or 50 years, I had little bouts of inflammation and little things happening, a little bit of a swollen joint here or, here and there. But it obviously culminated because I'm really having consistent chronic inflammation, which I have to be very, very aware of and really do some things to mitigate it. Okay. So those factors above is why we have inflammation. Okay. So let's zero in on one particular thing that we can do something about, because sometimes the toxins we can, not spray DEET insect sprays on our skin, because DEET was used in the First and Second World Wars as chemical warfare. So that's what we're spraying on our skin there. Even certain things in the perfumes, your skin is the largest organ of your body. And so your your skin is constantly getting bombarded with chemicals. But the modern diet has a big impact, and that's what I want to zero in on. Okay, so the typical Western diet, as I said, is the perfect recipe for chronic inflammation because we have ultra processed food. So anything that comes in a package and usually has ingredients and colors in it that we can't even pronounce, that's a no no. Refined carbs, white bread, white rice, white sugar, shocking for inflammation. Processed meats, okay, and processed, mainly meats, okay, that's not great. Fried foods, because oftentimes the oils are typically carcinogenic. That means that they're not great for us and they can lead to things like cancer due to the inflammatory nature of the oils, and then heating those oils to high temperatures. So not good. And of course, soft drinks, sodas and sugary drinks. And basically soft drinks are liquid inflammation. Okay. And as I said, I had all of those things growing up as a teenager and didn't sort of, thought at the time didn't affect me, but it's a process of accumulation. Okay, so it's very, very hard. You have to be very conscious not to follow the traditional Western diet. Okay, so if that's the case, what do we eat if all of those things that I just listed are not good? Okay. Well, fruits and vegetables, but here's the thing, not too much fruit, because fruit has a lot of fructose in it, okay? And fructose is a form of sugar. It's a form of glucose, okay? And any kinds, if you've got chronic inflammation, you want to cut out all the fruit until it becomes stable, okay? Then you can add in, your strawberries, your blueberries, your mulberries, those sorts of things, okay? Because they've got the most antioxidants and the least amount of sugar. So if you're suffering, like at the moment, I don't eat any fruit whatsoever because I'm trying to get a particularly bad bout of inflammation reduced. So no fruit until things settle down, okay? And then you can introduce berries. If you're going to have grains, have whole grains. At the moment, I don't have any grains either. Um, if I do, it will be something like brown rice or quinoa, okay? Not when people say whole grains, they often think, oh, well, Nutrigrain, they say there's whole grains in Nutrigrain. No, because by the time they've processed it, milled it, oftentimes bleached it, and thrown in a whole swag of other chemicals and sugar, forget it. No cereals are any good. All right, so cut out all your cereals, but go for whole grains like quinoa or spelt flour, maybe almond flour if if you have to have bread. Or brown rice, okay? Nuts and legumes. So things like lentils. I'm not a huge lentil person, but occasionally I'll do like a dal or something like that in a curry. I certainly don't eat lentils just as straight out lentils. Almonds and walnuts are really good. Other nuts are great too, but those are the better ones, the almonds and the walnuts. Of course, fatty fish, the omega-3s in fish. So your salmons, your tunas, your mackerels, your sardines. And luckily, I love all of those. But if you don't like fish at all, you can get the omega-3 supplements. Okay. Spices and herbs, particularly garlic, ginger, and turmeric. They're all anti inflammatory herbs and spices. Okay. And plant-based proteins. So a lot of leafy greens, like the chlorophyll in the leafy greens is very similar to our blood in its makeup. So circulation is really important because it helps with the oxygenation of your body, which is key, but it also helps the blood circulate and flush out toxins and inflammation. Okay, so lots of leafy greens. So that's something we can directly affect. As I said, some of those other things, like we can't affect the fact that they make cereals that are just inflammation in a box, but we can choose not to eat them. We can choose to exercise more and not be more sedentary. Okay, and certainly the diet. But here's some other ways that we can reduce the inflammation. Exercise, like, doesn't have to be pounding it out at the gym. Even a 20-minute brisk walk will do, but an hour a day will do very, very well to help reduce inflammation. Of course, manage stress. So if you are in a stressful job, see if you can, when you go home, just sort of have a plan about uh, some of the things you can control. Your boss might be an absolute goose, and you can't do anything about that, but you may be able to make a plan around how often you have to, deal with the boss, or maybe you can negotiate work from home days. Just ways of managing stress, whether that's work or family or life in general. Have a pause, have a think. What can I do to sort of simplify my life so that I don't have to have so much stress? Sleep. Sleep is the time where your body can start to fight the inflammation and any other thing. The rest and digest is when all of your cells start to renew. And if you have poor sleep, that means you have poor health in general. Okay. So sleep is regulating that inflammation in your body. So you really need to get 8 hours of sleep. Okay. If you can get a bit more, great. But 8 hours is essential. And it could be making sure that you do exercise an hour a day so that you're tired, physically tired, and that you have a bit of a bedtime ritual, like no phones for an hour before bed. Maybe you read, maybe you draw, maybe um, you know, have a hot chocolate and talk to your partner. So have a routine and make sure your sleep is good quality, 8 hours. And of course, excessive alcohol and excessive smoking, that kind of goes without saying. So, chronic inflammation is a very, very dangerous condition to be experiencing over time. Okay. I'm not saying that if you're feeling inflamed now, you're going to get, because I'm not a doctor either. I'm just doing my own research. And of course, talk to your GP and do your own research. So, I'm not saying that if you've got chronic inflammation or, one of your joints is playing up, you're going to get cancer or die of a stroke. However, studies have categorically shown that chronic inflammation without addressing it is a direct correlation to those conditions: Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, strokes, and a plethora of other things. Okay. But we can do something about it with the diet, with the exercise, managing the stress and sleep. They will go a long, long way to reducing it and hopefully even having your system, your fire department, go back to only fighting uh, fires in an emergency and not being switched on and inflaming your body 24 hours a day. Okay, because that is the contributor to disease. So the question that I have for you is, are you going to keep throwing gasoline on the fire? You're still going to contribute to inflammation, or are you going to use one of these tips and start, and then you can add the rest, okay, in, because your health is your wealth, and your body is asking you, it's asking me to help support it. And once we support our body is an amazing, miraculous thing that will always try to get back to homeostasis, that is stability and centering and its peak health, if we don't get in its way. Okay. So I hope that's helpful. If it is, please hit the subscribe button. It's totally free. There's no payment. I had somebody say, I'd love to subscribe, but I can't afford it. Well, it's free. Okay. So by subscribing, you help my little baby channel. And by sharing and liking, you're helping other people and also telling YouTube that amidst all of the crap that's out there, that you actually like this information. Okay. So until then, let's knock this inflammation right down. Let's knock it on the head and have the rest of our life as the best of our life. Bye for now.